Spolar Power Load introduces the Spolar Gold Premier, the world's finest shot shell reloading system. The Gold Premier is precision machined from billet aluminum and steel using state-of-the-art CNC machines at True Groove Machine in Fontana, California. True Groove Machine is an aircraft quality machine shop, founded in 1959 by Tom Harrison. Tom's sons, TJ and Bob Harrison, currently own and operate the business. As avid sportsmen, they have more than a professional interest in Spolar products. Spolar Power Load would like to take this opportunity to thank True Groove for helping to make the Gold Premier the perfect loader. Each machine is entirely hand-assembled in the USA and thoroughly tested prior to delivery. It is without a doubt the finest shot shell reloader available. Here's Carter Spolar, the owner of Spolar Power Load.
Correct, and every loader loads a minimum of 100 live rounds of ammunition, goes through every machine, and we send the people samples that were actually loaded on their machine. And if they duplicate what we put in it, they'll get the same results.
Now, with complete information on the operation and function of the Spolar Gold Premier, here's Carter Spolar's daughter, Michelle Spolar.
Now that you've received your Gold Premier reloader, we're going to show you how to unpack it. First, you want to open it with any razor knife. You just want to cut along the tape portions. You don't want to cut the cardboard. You can feel the seams of the tape. It's packaged very tight, so it's going to spring open for you. On top is going to be instructions on how to lift the reloader out. It does weigh 56 pounds, so you do want to be careful if you have a bad back. This is your instructions and also any shot and powder reloading data that we've included. There's 4 foam corners that need to be removed, and you want to grab them from the bottom, as you don't want to destroy them if you ever need to send your reloader back for any repairs or adjustments or just general maintenance. Now, there's also an inner carton, which is just sealed with 1 line of tape. Now, you want to, again, the reloader weighs 56 pounds, and it's sitting, you want to grab the reloader by the top plate, not by any of the tooling, but by the top plate that's on top. You may want to have someone help you get the box out of the way. You can grab it by the handle. But it's very important you don't want to grab it by any of the tooling over here because that can affect your adjustments. Okay, first thing we'll want to look at is your accessory box.
And that comes attached all on that piece of plywood.
Yes, which is attached to the plywood. Inside the accessory box, you're going to find a cover if you've ordered one, your shot and powder bottles. Inside your shot and powder bottles, you'll want to cut anything very lightly so you don't scratch any of the surfaces. Now the large bottle is for the shot, as it should be marked. The smaller bottle is for the powder, and stored inside the powder bottle are your dies. So you want to make sure you get those out of there. We're going to store these because we're going to show you how to put these on later. Okay. You're also going to receive, we give samples of wads, which we prefer to use in the reloader. What kind of wad you use is really up to you. Your primer can, that's for your sprint primers. A lock for locking the reloader. This is a tool kit, hex keys in case you ever need to do any work on your reloader. That's generally all the sizes that there are. This is your lubrication, your lock pin, and shells that have actually been loaded with your reloader. This is your AC adapter for your primer settling system. All you'll want to do from this point is you want to unbolt the reloader from the board, and you'll want to store the board for later use in case you need to ship it back.
What about all the other plastic on top there?
That it should cut off. Some of the important features, this is just bubble wrap, which keeps it protected from shipping. This is taped at four different points. But you want to be kind of careful that you don't mess with any of the adjustments on the tooling head, which is right here. This is all your tooling on the reloader, so any kind of grabbing of any of these parts could change any of the adjustments. Also, we have tie straps, which secure the loader for shipping. You'll want to cut those. This one around the handle and the primer tray arm. There's one around the wad block area and the cross shaft. You'll want to cut that. And there's one around the cross shaft and the press plate. You'll want to cut that. Now the loader will activate.
So as it comes from the factory, it's basically preset.
This loader is preset from the factory, yes. The only adjustments that need to be made on the reloader are ones of preference for your crimp, your starter crimp, your radius crimp. All other adjustments should be made. Primer seating depth shouldn't change. Nothing really needs to be changed on the reloader.
Right. And all the things we talked about, we're going to see later on, right?
We're going to see later on. We have a loader that's set up on a reloading table, and we'll show you how to install all the parts and where they go. Now we've moved to a loader that we already have bolted to the table. The first thing that you'll want to do is have a good sturdy reloading bench. If you're going to use a hydraulic, you'll always want to make sure that you have at least 3/4 inch plywood. Particle board is not strong enough for a hydraulic. If you're going to use the loader manually, that will do, but we really prefer that you use a good sturdy reloading bench.
Spolar Power Load recommends a 3/4 inch table as the bare minimum, especially when using the hydraulic cylinder. 3/4 inch tables will flex and adversely affect the performance of the reloader unless at least part of the cylinder plate is reinforced. A 1 3/4 inch table is ideal, but even then, if you use individual boards, you must make sure they are tied together in one form or another. Spolar Power Load manufactures and sells a reloading table designed especially for this loader. Contact Spolar for more information.
In the bag with your wrenches, you'll find that we've included bolts to secure the loader down with. These are 3-inch bolts. If you need longer bolts, we can send you some. And as you can see, they're already installed on the reloader. This loader has been installed correctly on the reloading bench. Also, these are the hex keys, which we told you we sent with the reloader.
So the key factor is then just to have it very securely mounted to the table.
Very securely. It's very important, especially if you're using the hydraulic, because you're going to get a lot of flexing in a table. But flexing is all right as long as you've got the loader bolted down securely. And if you're using it manually, you're not going to be putting as much pressure on it because it's just arm motion. But if you're going to be using a hydraulic cylinder, there is a lot of pressure there, and you are going to have flexing of your table. So it is very important that you have it bolted down securely. The next thing that you want to do is put your bottles in. This is your powder bottle. It's the smaller bottle, and it's clearly marked powder. You'll put that on the reloader in the front, and it just simply threads on to what we call the powder bottle adapter. And when it's screwed in, the powder should be facing the front of you. And the same with the shot bottle. This shot bottle holds 25 pounds of shot, so you don't need to refill it very often. lot of threads in here because that's a lot of weight to hold on there. You just want to bolt that down securely. Okay, the next thing you'll want to install are going to be the dies. This is a 12 gauge reloader, so these are 12 gauge dies. They're the largest die. The opening is the largest of all the different sizes. So you want to pull out your dies. There should be 8.
And obviously they're available for different gauges as well.
Yes, when you receive a different gauge change, if you order, say, a 20 gauge change, you will receive 20 gauge dies also. You'll always want to keep your bags, especially if you're going to be having multiple gauge changes. You can just store your dies and your different accessories in there. Now, when you install your dies, there's what we call the die retaining ring, and it's spring activated. And you can either install the dies by pulling back on the ring and dropping the dies in, or a faster way is to just simply pull the handle down just slightly until the dies line up with the larger portions of the die retaining ring, and then they just drop right in. So you have 2 ways of installing your dies. Okay. Then you have your spent primer box, and this is for your spent primers as they drop out of the old shell. And that simply slides onto the front of the machine. There's a primer can bracket which has a little groove, and you simply slide it in there. Next is your AC adapter, which is for your primer and your shot and powder settling system. We have one hooked up to this machine already through the table. It simply plugs in to the electrical box. There's an outlet right there, and then it plugs into any power source, any 110 power source. Then we have your lock pin and your combination lock. You can set the combination lock to any combination that you like. And this goes into the cross shaft on the opposite side of the handle. Now, since the reloader can be used left or right-handed simply by removing this bolt, removing the handle, and putting it on either side of the machine, whichever you prefer. If you do remove the handle from the right side to put it onto the left side, you must remove the handle stop, which is very simple. There's a bolt underneath the base plate in which to do so. You simply drop your lock pin into the cross shaft on the opposite side of the handle, and then the lock goes through the hole in the lock pin. Now, also you received is your dry lube and your oil for lubricating the machine. These I'll go over with you later on how to lubricate and maintain the machine. So we'll set those aside. Also, if you ordered a cover with your reloader, it goes on the reloader with the bottles installed. This is the black one. It comes in gold also. And it simply slides over primer tray. Zips down the left side. And the cover also locks onto the reloader. So you can put your lock pin in through your handle and simply take the lock and slip it through the hole in the zipper, and then through your lock pin. So you've locked a reloader. Always want to make sure your lock pin is out of the reloader before you pull the handle, because you can burr the base plate up if you don't do so. So that's the first thing you want to do if you ever pull the handle on the reloader and it won't move, is to check to make sure you've removed the lock pin. Yes, it doesn't hurt to dry use it. The first thing that we suggest you do when it comes from the factory, we have already lubricated the machine. But it doesn't hurt to use a little dry lube on the charge bar. And I can show you how to remove the charge bar for lubrication. You pull this pin and roller out of the back. The pin is always removed from the left side, and therefore that's the way it's reinstalled. Push the charge bar forward, and there's what we call a counter trip pin, and this actually trips the counter on the reloader. You want to set those in a safe place so you don't lose them, because they can get lost.
When you receive your loader, take a look at the counter. The number indicated represents the number of test shells the factory loaded on your reloader prior to shipment.
And then you want to remember you always have bushings in the reloader, and they can fall out. So you want to have your hand ready as you pull the charge bar out the back to catch the bushings. And this is how the charge bar is removed. You'll always want to, before you begin to load, is to take some of this dry lube, and you just need a puff. And the correct place to put it is above the powder bushing, because this is where the O-ring seal is. So you wanted to spread that around a little bit, and it doesn't hurt to spread it around all the sides.
And how often do you do this? Just
As often as you feel necessary. If you take the charge bar out and clean it, you'll always want to re-lubricate it after you clean it.
and if you feel it's sticking or
If you feel that it's sticking, or if you feel that you've got some powder migrating, it's a good idea to do it at that point. But you just want to remember that it's not a good idea to have two metals rubbing together. You always want to have some sort of lubrication anytime that you have, metal-to-metal contact. So then the charge bar slides right back in. You'll see that there's a roller here. This is what we call the charge bar linkage, and this is the charge bar roller. Charge bar roller fits up into the pocket in the bottom of the charge bar.
Okay, so it obviously has one correct way for it to go in.
One correct way for it to go through. And you slide that back in. And then again, as I said, when you reinstall your pin and roller, the roller goes in, small side in from the right, and the pin always goes in from the left. Now putting this pin and roller in is what actually activates your charge bar. So when you pull the handle down, the roller is following a cam, and it's pushing the charge bar forward, which picks up your powder charges and your shot charges and also drops them into the tubes. Installing the counter trip pin isn't really necessary, but you will not be counting how many times you've activated the machine if you don't install the trip pin. So that's really an option for you to do. Now some of you may have received your reloader with the primer tray removed from the reloader for shipping. And if that's the case, it's very simple to install it. Your bolts should be inside the primer tray. There's features of the primer tray I'll point out to you now. This right here, these two bolts, is actually the primer track clamp. And that's what clamps the primer track, which is here, to the primer tray. Underneath, you can see is the primer tray bracket. And that bracket is where this bolt will go. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to set your primer tray onto the primer tray arm and install the bolt up from the bottom.
If you treat the primer tray with a light coat of furniture polish or car wax, it will improve feeding of the primers.
You'll want to tighten it down with a wrench. This is a 1/2-inch bolt, so it goes up in there quite a ways. Make sure that the primer tray arm fits inside the groove before you tighten it down, or you won't have a correct fit. Okay, next you'll see that the primer tray settling system motor is attached to the primer tray. You'll want to put the leads, attach them to the motor. Either direction is fine. And you want to lift the primer tray lid, install the primer track in between the primer track clamp and the primer tray itself. Now the positioning of the primer track is fairly important as to how the primers will drop from the tray into the track. If you find that you have any hanging up at that point, you can readjust this yourself. We suggest that you have the primer track at a slight angle, being the right side being towards the front of the machine more than the left side. And you can line the groove of the primer tray up with the primer track. And that's all there is to it. It's assembled. You want to make sure that your primer tray pin is in the top, otherwise the primers can actually flip inside the tray. Okay, actually before you begin reloading, we highly recommend that you activate the loader 15 to 20 times dry. This will familiarize yourself with the reloader. This is the Spolar Gold Premier reloader. It's a progressive 8-station reloader, and some of the features are that it loads 1,200 rounds per hour if it's hydraulic. The manual reloader, realistically, you can load up to 600 rounds per hour. Let's go through some of the features. First of all, this is your shot and your powder. They are turned off in this position, on in this position, and when you want to drain your powder, it goes over the drain tubes. These are simply a safety precaution. Your shot is in the same manner, over to the left, to the center is on, and this is the drain position. This safety plug for the shot is not recommended that you rely on this to hold 25 pounds of shot because it can go, but it is there for your protection so you don't drain shot all over the place. Let's go through some of the ways that the reloader works. Pull the handle down. You can see that a lot of things are happening. First thing you'll probably notice is the wad arm swinging over. That is what actually deposits your wad into the shell. Okay, we will go over that when we actually reload. Some of the other things you might notice as you're pulling the handle down is you start to feel a little resistance in this area. And the reason for that is that your charge bar cam roller is entering the curve here in which it actually starts to activate the charge bar. You'll also feel some resistance as you get about halfway down, and that's simply your crimp stations back here beginning to crimp. And that's a very heavy spring back there that actually engages, so you will feel some resistance. Some of the important things you'll want to get used to as you're going through a dry run is pushing the handle back completely. When you're reloading, if you don't do this, you will not seat the primer all the way. And the same thing coming forward. You will always want to make sure that the handle goes down into the stop itself.
Is it true that you want to have somewhat of a consistent throw every time?
Consistency is very important. If you start jerking the reloader, it's capable of flipping primers, it's capable of getting inconsistent shot and powder charges as you're jerking the machine. So you want to practice pulling it as steady as possible. And as I said, if you just practice pulling on the handle at this point and just watching what's going on, I can run through what's happening with you real fast before we actually start to load. I'm going to put a shell through the machine without any shot and powder, and first you want to install the shell onto the shell seating post. You want to do that with the handle in the up position. And you want to put the shell onto the shell seating post. What's happening here in the up position is that you're actually lubricating the die with the lubricating swab. You want to keep a couple drops of oil on that about every 1,000 rounds or so just to keep the dies lubricated. That's the oil that we provide. That's the die lube. It's right here. Okay. And then as it comes down, the machine actually will pick up the shell. Nothing is really happening at this stage. You're simply picking the shell up in the reloader, and it's just ready for cycling. As you pull the handle down, the shell is moved around to the deprime station, and as you pull up, you actually deprime the shell. The primer falls into the chute and down into the can. At this point, you're also resizing the brass of the shell, so it may be a little difficult to pull down on the handle, and there again, make sure you pull the handle down into the stop. As you push the handle down again, you'll want to remember if you actually had powder and shot in here, these were turned on, you would be dropping shot and powder from here. So this is something that you'll have to get used to, is actually timing the machine as to when to turn on the powder and the shot, because it's not automatic.
Until all of the stations are full? Until
all of your stations are full. If you're just cycling one shell through the machine, you can actually turn them on and then off again just for the one shell. So as you pull the handle again, you're actually charging the powder, so you'd want your powder to be on. This is your powder drop tube, and as you pull the handle forward, you're actually picking powder up into the bushing, and at this point you're dropping the powder.
And again, very positive on both the ins and outs of this.
Yes, it's very important that you push all the way back on the handle and all the way forward. Next you're going to be putting a wad into the wad holder, which we can pretend that we're doing here. And you want to turn your shot on. Now when you turn your shot on, when the charge bar is in the back position, you're automatically charging that bushing right now. So you don't have any chance to turn that, even turning the shot off, you still have a charged bushing. So as we pull the handle, you would be depositing your wad. And at this point, when the charge bar moves forward, it's depositing the shot through the shot transfer tube down into the shot drop tube. Okay, and push the handle back all the way again. Now pulling the handle forward, we're going to start our start crimp. Of course, we don't want to turn our shot off.
Okay, the start crimp just crimps the top?
It begins the crimping. And this is an adjustable. As you can see, the dies pull out easily from this machine. This is adjustable. This is your preference. We have set this machine to our liking from the factory. If you prefer more of a start crimp, And we'll go over that a little more in detail as we're actually reloading.
Now, is it true that all the dies come out just like that
All
one?
the dies come out. The only one that doesn't come out easily is the one that's in the deprime station, and that's because you are actually priming a shell when you push the handle back and from the downstroke. That's the only thing that happens in the downstroke is the actual priming of the shell.
Okay.
That happens from the bottom of the shell. Therefore, there is a button here, and if you can just take your fingernail and push the little button back and then turn your die retaining ring, it will also come out. But it does not come out easily simply because of the die retaining button. However, anytime that you want to take these dies out at any position, if you want to weigh your powder charges, your shot charges, look at your starter crimp, any of that, they come out from any station, which comes in really handy if you've jammed a shell in the machine. Then you want to go to your crimp station. There again, there's going to be some resistance because you're actually crimping the shell, so you want to pull down and get the handle into that stop. That is also an adjustable station, which we'll go into later as we're actually reloading. And we can go around. This is the radius crimp, which happens here. And what also happens here is not just the radius crimp on the shell, but you're actually partially ejecting the shell from the die, which is going to make it more simple to eject the die from the knockout station. Here again, you push your handle back all the way, and as you come around, you come to the knockout station, and the shell is dropped in the shell drop tube.
Okay, and it
And where it
knocks
gets
it out.
stuck.
And once it comes out, it's loaded
Once it comes out, it's loaded
and ready to shoot.
and ready to shoot. But we highly recommend that you go through this process and you practice, familiarizing yourself, even with empty shells, as I've just done. Practice when you're going to turn your shot and your powder off. Shot and powder spills, can be corrected, but they can really wreak havoc with this machine. The tolerances are very, very close when this machine was made, so it cannot tolerate being dirty or, many powder and shot spills. So you want to clean up any spills that you might have. Basically, when you will be activating this reloader, when we start loading, you'll see that this is actually the primer and the shot and powder settling system that will be activated by this charge bar roller here. There's a spring-activated momentary switch, which you have an option of turning on and off with this red button. But that will actually activate a motor which vibrates the primer tray and vibrates all the way up into the system here.
And that vibration brings the primer down?
The vibration brings the primer down, and it also settles all the shot and the powder so you get real consistent charges in your reloads. Now we're going to start to load. We'll go over some procedures you want to go through before you actually do that. The first thing you always want to do is make sure that you have bushings in your machine. It can be really dangerous if you load a powder charge without a bushing in it. We do have a safety feature built into the charge bar, which I will show you. If you do forget to put a powder bushing in, this safety hole right here will allow the powder to go in here and out the charge bar, so you won't be actually charging anything, but it's still always want to make sure that you have bushings in the charge bar. Your reloader on 12 gauge is generally sent to you, unless you specify differently, with 17.5 grains of Hodgson Clays powder and 1 ounce and 1/8 of number 8 shot. We use Hodgson powders exclusively in all of our reloading. We feel that that's a superior powder. Okay, so now that you've checked that you have bushings in the machine, you want to fill up your powder bottle, and you just pull the lid off of it. We don't really have a capacity on the powder because it varies with different powders as to how much it will hold, how much reloading you can do. It's always a good idea to have your shot and your powder bottles in the off position. And then your shot. Now the shot bottle is designed to hold 25 pounds of shot. That's something you can't do with most reloaders. your shot and your powder in, and they're both in the off position. Next thing you want to do is put your primers in. You want to pull your primer tray pin. Now I want to point out at this point that you have two pins that come with the reloader, the manual reloader. You have the primer tray pin, which always has a black spacer on it, and you have your charge bar pin. They're two separate pins and they cannot get mixed up. If you try to put this pin in with your charge bar, you're going to run into problems. The charge bar cam roller pin has a black ring on it, and that's to help you determine which is which. That goes with the charge bar roller. They are two different lengths. The longer pin goes with the charge bar roller. So I just want to point that out at this time. Again, your pin always goes in from the left side. Okay, your primer tray holds 400 primers. You pull the tray lid back, you slide the primers in, and slide the box out. I'm going to load in 200 and then move the primers down the tray. I close the lid, and it's important to put the tray pin back in. Now, your settling system here works on a momentary switch, which you can actually activate by hand by just pushing the little white button with the spring on it. And that starts the primers moving down the tray. Short bursts usually generally work better to get the primers down the tray. That's 200 primers. We'll add one more box.
And so in essence, you're lining them up as well into the feed ramp.
Right, they're going down into the primer track at this time also. That's what the settling system does, is it actually vibrates the primers from the tray into the track. We use a Winchester 209 for our 12 gauge, in fact, basically for all our reloading. You can use any primer you like in this system, though. It will accept any primer. Okay, so we've got our primers, we've got our shot, we've got our powder loaded. We have our wads ready. This is a AA wad. And as I said, we're loading 17.5 grains of Hodgson clays, an ounce and an eighth, number 8 shot with a AA wad. And we're going to run through some AA holes and some Remington Premier holes, and just kind of a variety of holes. But we're going to start with the AA. Okay, we're going to cycle one shell at a time just to get used to the reloader. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you have your powder and your shot turned in the off position. Your charge bar roller and pin are engaged. If you do not have the charge bar roller and pin engaged, the charge bar will not activate as you're loading. This is a feature which comes in handy at times if you just want to do certain things with your reloader. So first you want to pull the handle down. If you would like, you can turn your primer system off right now if you like. Put your shell on your shell seating post. And you push the handle all the way back.
Watch AA holes for excess plastic covering the inside of the primer pocket. The excess plastic makes depriming difficult. It can also create a buildup of plastic in the primer cup and the primer cup housing. This condition seems to be more prevalent with 410 hulls.
Okay, you cycle the machine again. At this point, you're going to be depriming the shell and resizing the shell into the brass. So you want to pull down. There's going to be a little resistance there. Make sure the handle fits into the block. Then you push the handle back all the way. At this point, it's very important because you're actually seating the primer up into the base of the shell. So it's very important that you push back on that handle as far as it will go. At this point, you can turn your powder on because your next station is going to be your powder charge. Okay, once the charge bar has come forward, you have filled up the powder bushing. So you can actually turn the powder bushing off or turn the powder bottle off and come back. And at this point, you've actually charged the powder. Now, we recommend that when you start loading, that you actually take and you weigh an average for 10 shells of your powder charges. So you want to remove the die and the shell, dump your powder out into your scale, and measure that you're getting an accurate weight of powder.
So you do 10 of them, divide by 10.
Do 10 of them and you come up with an average, and that's telling you basically what you're throwing. So you want to make sure that your bushing may call for it may be a certain bushing that calls for a certain weight of powder, but not all bushings are the same. They vary from batch to batch. So we always recommend that you weigh your powder charges before counting on what charge you actually have.
And if you wanted to change the amount of powder that was being thrown, you have to change the bushing.
You change the powder bushing,
Okay.
right.
Right.
And I'll go through with how you change the powder bushings. It's very simple. The next thing you want to do is you want to put a wad in. Now the wads, we use and recommend a AA wad, but you always want to make sure that the petals are folded out. You don't want to catch a petal. If you do catch a petal, it's not going to make that much difference. It's going to make for not a very nice looking shell, but it's not going to actually do any damage. At this point you want to turn your shot on, and there again you've turned your shot on, your bushing is underneath in the back position, so you've already charged your shot, so you can actually turn that off. This way you're not going to forget when you're cycling one shell and have a powder spill. So you pull your handle again. At this time you can see the wad is being pushed down into the shell, and as soon as the charge bar activates, you can hear that it actually is putting the shot right on top of the wad. Okay, there again, always push your handle all the way back. So now you have a shell that has powder, a wad, and shot. So now you go to your crimp station. This is your starter crimp station. Again, you're going to feel resistance, but make sure that the handle's down into the stop. Okay, that is your start crimp station. This has all been pre-adjusted from the factory. If you have a setting that you would like that would be different, you always want to make the adjustment at the top nut. You never want to do any adjusting from below the base plate or the top plate here. Next, you go to your crimp station. Again, there's going to be a lot of resistance here because you're crimping the shell, and you're also activating a very heavy spring at that point. Again, if you're using a different wad and different shot combination, you may want to increase or decrease your crimp, and that's always done from the top bolt of the top plate. It's never done from on top or underneath the top plate.
So basically you loosen up that top bolt and screw the...
unscrew the crimp die here, and as you can see, this is the crimp that we've ended up with now. If we want to deepen that, we can loosen the bolt and turn down the crimp die.
Turn down, or opposite,
Or
turn
up if you want less of a crimp. This is a crimp that we prefer, and that's how the machine is set up when we send it out. You put your die back in. One of the nice things about this machine, and I can go ahead and show you this feature now, is if you are working on one shell and you do want to deepen or increase or decrease your crimp depth, you can simply pull back on this index cam here. And this is what we mean by a neutral positioning of the die turret that we refer to in the manual. If you want to just deepen that crimp, you can simply run that shell back up. And say you pull back on this index cam right here, which is spring activated, and that will keep the die turret from spinning around. You can continue to go straight up and down without having it actually cycle. So say for instance you want it deeper, so you loosen the bolt and you screw this down a little bit, pull back on your index cam, pull down on your handle, and deepen your crimp. And you can continue to do that until you get the crimp of your liking. So then we go around to the radius crimp, and at the radius crimp again, what you're doing is actually putting a radius on the top of the shell, so it will fit into the chamber much easier. You're also partially ejecting the shell out of the die, and I'll show you. This is how it sits in the die. The shell is actually partially ejected at this station. And we've put a radius on the crimp. And when you come around to the last station, this is our loaded shell.
And you can get cranking once you get everything all set up, right?
Once you get used to it, and once you've done this a few times, we really highly suggest that you cycle one shell at a time. That will help you get your timing with your powder and your shot turning on and off. And you know, it will just help you get used to the machine.
But once you get used to it, and once you get up and running, you can
Then you continue the cycle.
Once you get all the stations filled up, you can leave your powder on.
You leave your shot and your powder on at that point, yes.
Right.
And then you only have to turn it off when you empty the machine out, which you don't ever have to empty the machine out.
It seems one of the neat advantages of this machine is the fact that you can take your dies in and out to inspect and or check certain things.
Right. That is one of the features of the machine that we design for that reason. Not only that, but there are times that you have weak cases in a shell, and you will actually have a crushing or a bulging of the shell. And to get that out of a machine when it's stationary is almost impossible. So what's nice is if you do have a shell that crushes at this point, you can pull it out, you can cut around here, empty the shell, and get the die. You can get yourself out of virtually any situation that you may get into with this reloader. Now let's try some progressive reloading. I've got a variety of shells here. I'm just going to run through this machine. And again, we're going to start by pulling down the handle, making sure our powder and our shot is turned off. Our charge bar linkage is connected with the pin in the roller. We're going to come down and put our first shell in. Okay, and we're going to pull the handle down again. At this stage, we're going to be depriming and inserting a shell.
And that noise we hear is the vibrator.
That's the vibrator, the shot, powder, and primer settling system. Now at this stage, again, we're going to have to push back hard on the handle because we're priming the shell from the bottom, and our first shell is already being primed. At this point, before we progress to the powder drop stage, we turn our powder on. One thing I would like to point out at this time is that it's very important to have this wad cam block installed on these two dowel pins here. If you don't have this installed while you're loading, your wad arm will not line up perfectly underneath the shot drop tube. So I'd like to point that out. Okay, our next station is going to be the powder drop station. Our first shell is going to have the powder dropped. Actually, the powder is being picked up, and now it's being deposited at this point. Again, push hard back on the handle. At this point, you want to install a wad and turn your shot on. When you install the wad, you want to make sure that the pedals are out. You don't want to catch a pedal on the shot drop tube. You want to pull your handle forward. Install another shell on the shell sitting post and push the handle back hard. Okay, install another wad. You can leave your shot and your powder on at this point because we're progressive reloading at this time. Install your wad. Okay. We have our first shell that actually has its crimp, and we can take that out and take a look at it if you like. See the crimp on that shell? Doesn't have the radius crimp, only the crimp. These stations, the knockout station, the loop swab, the D-prime, and the powder drop are not adjustable. Okay, so you want to go to your next station, which your first shell is having the radius crimp put on it, which we can see has been put on it, and the shell's been partially ejected. Install a wad, make sure the pedals are out. There's quite a bit of pressure on the machine at this point because you have a whole lot going on in the upstroke. Again, push the handle back to get your primer seated. You can also, if you choose, if you want to make sure that your primer has been properly seated into the bottom of the shell, you can partially pull back on the handle just enough to get the die turret into the larger slots on the die retaining ring, and you can check to make sure that your primer is seated well. That's something that you can do right there at that station. As you can see, I'm running through a variety of shells here. So you can see that the versatility of this machine, you don't necessarily have to change crimps for different shells. Some reloaders, you need to change the crimp depth for each individual shell that you put through it. Not so with this machine. There again, I'm pushing back very hard, and you can see why it's important to have a sturdy table, because you really need to put some pressure on that backstroke to prime that shell.
And the shells keep dropping out, huh?
They keep dropping out. It's a little easier from the sitting position. With the sitting position, you have a little better leverage on your arm. I'm using two hands just to make sure that I'm pulling down on the crimp there. Sometimes you'll feel some resistance at that point because not only are you crimping, but you're actually depriming, and sometimes a primer can be stuck in there real good. This is why some of our customers like to get the hydraulic, because it starts to wear on their shoulder after a while.
And the hydraulic speeds it up a lot better, huh?
This hydraulic cycle is about every 3.5 seconds, so you really get some speed there. Okay, we're gonna stop at the AA shell here, and I'll show you how to actually turn off your shot and powder if you want to empty the machine. Okay, you have your last shell coming through the D-prime. Okay, you want to continue putting a wad through, but since you have a shell still under the powder drop tube, which is going to cycle around. Still want to get that powder charged. When the charge bar comes forward, I can turn the powder off because I've discharged the bushing.
Now, did you want to turn it off before the charge bar goes?
You can do it either way.
Okay.
You can do it either way. I turn it off while it's forward because I remember it at that time, and
Right.
it's easier for me.
But if you forget, there is some powder left in the bushing, right?
If you do forget, there is powder in the bushing, so regardless, you're going to be charging the powder drop tube.
Okay.
You're going to be charging the shell.
But it won't drop unless there's a shell
Unless it will drop if there's a shell there. So
there.
you
What if there's not a shell there?
if there's not a shell there, you'll have a powder spill.
Okay, so then you use the tube, the release tube, to get it out of there, or?
Well, if you found that you've got a charge that you don't want, again, say for instance, well, we've already charged with shot. And if you learn to time everything right, you can get yourself any situation. So now we have powder that has already dropped into the shell. We have a full charge shot bushing, and say for instance that we wanted to get rid of that. We can just push the charge bar forward by releasing that pin.
Oh, I see.
And the same would go for the powder. If you had a charge of powder, which you get a charge of powder, when the charge bar is forward, you're actually charging the bushing at this
Right.
point.
Uh-huh.
So then you would simply get rid of the shot here. You would simply do the same thing. You're actually dropping the powder on the backstroke, which is just the opposite of the shot.
Right.
So with the shot, you're picking up the shot in the backstroke and depositing it into the shot drop tube on the forward stroke, and the powder is just the opposite.
Right. Okay. So the key there is that you
It's
have.
timing.
That's right, but you have the ability to clean it out
Yes,
easily.
to correct any mistake you might have made, yes.
But the smart thing is to remember in the first place, so that you don't have to do that.
That's right, and
Okay.
that's why we suggest that you run one shell through and you cycle the machine and learn the steps of the reloader. Now it's important whenever you've disengaged the charge bar to remember to re-engage it with the pin in the roller, otherwise you'll get empties. And that won't do very good for your shooting scores. Okay, so now we need to turn off our powder, continue our shot. If you want to make sure that you've got powder in there, you can pull the shell out at any station, see, and you can check and make sure that you do indeed have a powder charge. Now before we progress to the next station, I have already charged my shot. Since my shot is charged on the backstroke, I have a full bushing, and if you turn the shot off, you can see that there's shot in the bushing. So therefore, simply pull the handle forward. It's still a little difficult. Okay, and now we can just run the machine dry since everything's turned off. By the way, there is no need to turn off your primers because they have they automatically will not feed another primer on top of another primer. So that's not necessary. And at this stage, you just run them through. And that's a progressive reloading. Now, you can see we've run a variety of shells, and they all basically have the same crimp. So there was no need to make any adjustments on this reloader. With this reloader, you get the same result with different hulls, just by running them through. This is a Spolar Power Load hydraulic. This was the first item that was ever invented by Spolar Power Load. This hydraulic pump is the only hydraulic that is actually electrically activated by solenoids. There's no mechanical parts in the activation of it. It works on a foot pedal, which is a rocking foot pedal, that you press one side or the other to get it to activate one stroke or the other stroke. This model comes with quick disconnects, which are not installed when it is shipped. You need to install these if you order quick disconnects later, and you'll need to do that yourself, and it's very important that you don't over-tighten these when you install them. If over-tighten these, you will crack this manifold, and it's a very expensive part to replace. So be sure that if you did order quick disconnects and you install them yourself, that you just gently tighten these, just enough to keep it from leaking. You want to use regular automatic transmission fluid. Dextron 3 is fine. You need about 2 quarts, and it is installed here. We suggest you use a funnel so you don't make a mess. And after that, you just need to plug it into your hoses, which are connected to your hydraulic cylinder. This quick disconnect model, you just pull back and install these. You want to pull these red plugs out. This is just to keep from seepage during shipping. And you just want to plug that in there.
Now, I assume the whole apparatus comes with the motor as well as the pump, or the
Spolar power load hydraulic comes with the pump and the motor assembly, the hoses and the cylinder and the plate assembly, as well as an adapter plate which fits under the underside of the reloader. And the hydraulic is not only made for the Spolar Gold Premier reloader, but we also make it for the Ponsonus Warren also. So it is sold for either model.
Okay, and this is something obviously you just mount underneath the table.
You can mount this underneath the table, you can mount it on the floor, you can mount it on the table. It depends on how your reloading bench is set up. Our reloading bench, we have holes drilled through the table so that the hoses can come up through it. But you don't have to do that. You can just set it next to it, or you can set it on the floor, and can even give you, if you let us know ahead of time, we can give you fittings that come straight out from the cylinder itself if it's easier for your hoses to come off the side rather than to come from the back. Okay, now we have the pump mounted underneath the table, and as I said, we have our hoses coming up through our reloading table. We've mounted the reloader on top of the cylinder plate, and the spacer on the opposite side of the loader. This keeps the loader level.
And that comes with the hydraulic
That comes with, that's all part of the hydraulic. The holes are all pre-drilled. We do have a template available if you request it. We can give you a template so you can actually pre-drill all your holes in your table before you even receive your setup, so we can do that also. So now what we're going to do is we have the cylinder ready to go, and we want to remove our handle.
So you're going to now convert it from manual to the
hydraulic handle. So we're going to take the manual handle out, and we do so by installing the proper wrench, and we pull it down towards you. That's the way you loosen it. There is no Loctite on this bolt. They are installed by women, so they're installed very securely. So you simply want to pull this bolt out.
And that frees the arm out, right?
Now we'll pull the arm out. And as you can see, when the arm comes out, there's a flat actually cut into the handle. And that is so when the bolt goes through, that it hits the flat surface. So when you reinstall your handle, make sure the flat is on the outside. We're going to set the handle aside. We want to stress, do not install the handle on the left side of the reloader when we're installing the hydraulic. The hydraulic handle also comes attached to the hydraulic plate. You want to pull the pin out, and again, don't mix this pin up with your primer tray pin or with your charge bar roller pin. They're different pins. Okay, you'll want to install this. You can lift the cylinder up and out of the way. There again, there's a flat cut in this handle, and the flange goes towards the back. Install that into the hole. And screw your bolt in. It's very important to have either the manual handle, and especially the hydraulic handle has to be securely tight. You can run into all kinds of problems if it's not. Anytime you have a jerking problem with the hydraulic, you'll know it's because your handle is loose. Okay, then you bring the cylinder down, and you match up the holes in the cylinder and the stub handle. And you put the pin in. Okay. Now we're ready to turn the hydraulic on. The hydraulic has a little bit of noise to it, but that's simply the motor running the pump. And we can just practice with the hydraulic, with the foot pedal. I use 2 feet. Now it doesn't, you can switch the pedal around, and that's why it doesn't make any difference which way you hook the hoses up, because you can actually switch the pedal around to activate the arm up or down. You want to make sure your shot and your powder are turned off and that your charge bar pin is connected. Always make sure your wad cam block is on the machine before you start. And you go up with the hydraulic, and you come down. One side of the pedal is for the up motion, one side is for the down motion. You can hear that high-pitched squeal. That tells you that it is at the end of its cycle. So you will know when you're loading with the hydraulic when you have actually reached the handle into the stop. You can see why you need to have a sturdy workbench, reloading bench. When you receive the hydraulic, these bolts will generally be loose, and that is for lineup purposes. You want to make sure that when you receive the hydraulic and when you hook it up, that this arm fits into the stop block. And once you feel that you've got a good lineup, you can lock these bolts down. That's really all there is to setting up the hydraulic. It's very simple.
Now here's some important information regarding the hydraulic cylinder and its operation. The holes in the mounting plate are oversized to enable right or left adjustment of the plate to assure perfect alignment of the cylinder. The cylinder has to be perfectly perpendicular to the front and back edges of your reloader. Hence, the cylinder has to pull the handle straight back. When you have achieved this adjustment, tighten the bolts that hold the reloader and cylinder plate to the table, and then drill a hole through your table for the bolt provided, using the back bolt hole in the cylinder plate as a guide. And with the hydraulic, you can do a lot of rounds, huh?
Yeah, you can cycle every 3.5 seconds with the hydraulic. So some people have even gone faster. I don't know how, but they have. But it frees you up so that you have your right hand to install a wad and your left hand to install a shell. And you can stop action anywhere in the middle. It's not a continuous action. So as you press down on the pedal is the only time that it actually activates. So you have plenty of time to get your fingers out of the way if you feel you're in danger.
Well, from looking at your smile, you really like the hydraulic
Yeah,
one.
this is the fun part. Yeah, it saves your shoulder, and it's just, I could do this all day long. Okay, now we're going to do some progressive loading with the hydraulic. First, we're going to start out just as we did with the manual, with a shell in your left hand, and you'll go up with the machine until it stops. We're going to turn our vibrator back on because I turned it off earlier. Come back down with the machine. Okay, we don't need a wad yet because we have the first shell is in the D prime station. It's going to be going to the D prime. Put another shell in the reloader. Okay, our next stage is going to be turning our powder on because our first shell is going to be under the powder drop tube. So we go up with the machine, and down with the machine. Now our first shell is going to be receiving shot and a wad. So we'll want to turn on our shot, install our wad. And from here on, we just load the wad, load the shell. And you can see how much faster it is loading with the hydraulic than it is by hand.
And now, of course, you just keep the shell, the shot and the powder on, basically.
Keep the shot and the powder on as you continue loading unless you empty the reloader. At the time that you empty the reloader, it's the only time that you need to turn the shot and the powder off. Say, for instance, you want to check your powder charge. You want to cycle. The machine always wants to be in the down position. So at this point with the hydraulic, you have a hydraulic arm that's putting a lot of pressure on the backstroke of this machine. So if you were to have the machine indexed back completely, sometimes you will not be able to turn the die retaining ring only because there's a lot of pressure on it. If you simply tap the hydraulic, which will move the machine up a little bit, it will free up that and you can pull your dies out at any station. So it's the same operation, it's just that using hydraulic, you just have a hydraulic cylinder doing the work for you instead of your arm. If you do, for instance, you find that you're having some trouble, and if you already have the hydraulic handle already attached and you want to maybe check something, you can always pull the pin. Sometimes you'll need to relieve a little bit of pressure. Pull the pin on the hydraulic, and you can install the handle onto the left side of the reloader. You'll always want to install a bolt into the handle. If you just install the handle into the reloader without a bolt, you have the risk of putting the handle all the way down and marring the base plate. So you want to you don't have to do it tightly, but if you say, for instance, you want to operate this by hand for one shot, you can do so with the hydraulic handle installed.
Right. And the key to remember is that you want to take your bar off after you hook the hydraulics back up.
Exactly. That's a very important point because if you're using the hydraulics and you've got the handle installed, you run the risk of hitting yourself.
So the handle keeps coming back down.
Exactly. Now, in this case, since I was trying to walk and chew gum at the same time, this is one of the features of the reloader that comes in handy. I wasn't paying much attention and I missed putting a shell into the reloader. Now I've got a full bushing full of shot. Normally you would have to cycle that through, have a shot spill and everything else, but with this reloader all you have to do is pull that charge bar pin and roller, hold something empty underneath this shell, and get rid of that shot charge.
And that's really convenient.
Yeah, it's convenient. You don't make messes. Messes can be made, but they can also be avoided.
One of the things that really hinders the operation of this machine and all reloaders is loose powder, loose shot, dirt.
That's very true because especially on this reloader is the tolerances are held so close in the machining processes. There's no stampings or casting in this machine. It's all machined parts, and the tolerances are held to aircraft quality standards. So they're very, very tight, and if you get a little bit of powder, a little bit of shot into anything, it can cause a lot of problems.
Starts hooking up the parts.
It starts hooking up parts, especially the primer feed system. You need to really keep that clean in the primer track system. The primer track system is right underneath the shot drop system. So if you do have a shot spill, you run the risk of having shot in the primer track.
In there.
Exactly, and it's very hard to detect something so small. So it is good to have an air gun or a can of air or something around to blow out any kind of spills that you might have. So
Great.
that's a hydraulic operation. Okay, now we're going to empty the machine. For this purpose, we're going to empty the machine for changing gauges, but we'll go through how do you drain the shot and the powder. We'll start with the powder. First, you remove the safety plugs, and I'll do that one at a time. You just want to dump your powder. The charge bar is in the back position for the powder, therefore you're not charging the bushing at the same time when you drain the powder. You want to put your container up under the drain tube and move the powder bottle over into the drain position.
So you really have three positions. You've got the closed.
You have the
charge.
off, you have the on, and you have the drain.
Okay.
And there's actually a dedent that is machined into the bottle adapter or the bottle holder itself that the actual dedent plunger moves into, so you can actually feel each setting. Okay, that's our powder. Okay, now for the shot, you want to move the charge bar forward. That way you're not going to be charging the bushing as you swing it over. Actually, I think we'd be better to pull the pin and roller and activate the charge bar forward. It gives us more room. Again, you want to pull out the safety plug. Are you ready? Probably hold the bottom of it. Okay?
And it goes pretty fast.
Moving the powder bottle like that will get any pieces that are left. Okay, the next thing we want to empty, and this is just for cleaning purposes, but I'll go ahead and run through it now, is the primers can be removed from the tray and from the track with a magnet. So anytime that you want to clean or check the primer track for shot or for debris, you want to clean out the primer system. And from the track, You can get most of the primers out this way. Any remaining primers can be removed from the front of the machine simply by indexing the primer feed system. But you can get most of the primers out through this way. Now we're going to show you how to change gauges. We're going to change today from a 12 gauge to a 410. Our gauge changes are available though in 12, 20, 28, and 410 sizes. So the first thing we're going to do to change the gauge is we're going to release the index camshaft from the top plate by inserting a wrench and turning the bolt counterclockwise. Okay, this releases that. Then you want to take a 9/16 wrench, insert it on the center bolt of the charge bar bracket, which is located on the top of the reloader, and pull it towards you to release it. I will generally loosen the 9/16 bolt and then loosen the 1/2" bolt, which is located directly behind it. These will generally be pretty tight because you want them to be pretty snug. There's a lot of pressure put on the top plate tooling when you're actually reloading.
And one would assume that you should have the powder and shot out of the machine.
So you always want to drain the shot and the powder first, as you will do as you're changing gauges anyway, because you're going to go from one type of powder to another when you're loading different gauges, and as well as shot. Okay, so those bolts are loose. You'll also want to pull the pin in the roller, charge bar cam pin, and charge bar cam roller. One thing that's a good idea before you go any farther is to actually remove the charge bar, and again you'll want to remove the counter trip pin from the front and the charge bar with the bushings in the back. And the reason you want to do this is to remind yourself to change the bushings. After which point, you simply remove the 2 bolts and washers. And the whole charge bar system comes off the reloader. And you can just lay that down and set it aside. Now the thing that's going to be left on top is called the shot transfer block. And you'll want to notice this when you reinstall it, that the angle part goes to the outside and the small section goes to the top. Next, your whole top plate assembly comes off. And if you place your fingers close to the top plate, close to the center shaft, and lift off, the whole top plate assembly simply comes off. And this is your 12 gauge top. Now you take your 410 top out of the box or the packaging. You'll have your dies. You'll set those aside. In this bag, you're going to have your bushings. You'll have 2 shells that have already been loaded in this gauge on your machine. And you'll have the wad cup, the shell seating head, and the shell seating cup. And you'll set those aside also. And you'll pull out your new die head, top plate. Now on this, you'll see that on the reloader, on the main shaft, there's a keyway cut into the back of the shaft. And I want to caution you anytime that you are lubricating this keyway that you don't run your finger up and down it because it can be sharp. On the top plate, you'll notice that there is an actual key that is bolted to the top plate. You don't ever want to loosen this bolt because this is a setting. This has already been set to line up perfectly with the machine. So all you want to do is sometimes if you find that this is dry in this area, you want to put a light coat of gun oil there. If it already has oil, that's fine. You want to line the key up with the keyway in the shaft. I can usually look through the top hole in the top plate. If you have trouble with it sliding down, make sure that the index cam bolt is out of the way and pop it down until it snaps down securely. Okay, in reverse order, you're going to want to put on your shot adapter, again making sure that the slanted side is to the outside of the machine and that the small edge is to the top. You're going to want to put your charge bar housing assembly back on. Now when you pick up your charge bar housing assembly, gravity is going to be pulling down on the linkage and it's going to pull the charge bar roller down. Always make sure before you put this on that you put the charge bar roller to the top. If it's not to the top and you put this back on, you're going to find that you won't be able to get your linkage in the correct position. Therefore, make sure your charge bar roller is to the top. Before you set this down onto the top plate, you want to make sure the charge bar linkage is also to the left side of the charge bar cam assembly. If it's not, you won't get any kind of lineup. So you set this back down. When you put the charge bar housing back onto the top plate, you want to make sure that the powder transfer tube, which is the tube that actually transfers the powder from the charge bar into the powder drop tube, is lined up at the top hole of the powder drop tube. You want to make sure that the shot transfer tube goes into the top of the shot transfer block. You can adjust the shot transfer block around a little bit if you don't get a fit. It should just stop right there. Then you want to reinstall your bolts. You want to start the threads on each bolt first before you actually start to tighten.
And you had mentioned earlier it's important to really tighten these down, right?
It is important to tighten these down. Before I snug them down, though, I do make sure that, that the tolerances here, that everything is nice and tight, that nothing is bound or nothing is incorrectly installed. Because if you tighten the center bolt down and you don't have these centered, you're going to bend a tube or you're going to break something. So before you actually tighten down on it, just take the time to look and make sure that everything's properly installed. Now the purpose of the center bolt that I'm tightening now, the 9/16 bolt, actually tightens the whole unit to the center shaft. The back bolt simply lines up the charge bar housing with the top plate. So you can see the center bolt is more important to have it tight than actually the back bolt. So that's the one that we're really focusing on. Then we would want to go ahead and reinstall our index cam shaft to the top plate. Sometimes you will need to press this in somewhat to get it lined up to the hole. All this really does is this is supporting the indexing system to the top plate to a secure surface. Anytime that you're doing any work, you never want to grab onto the knockout shaft. If you pull the knockout shaft out of alignment, it can make some strange noises as you're reloading. So you don't ever want to grab this shaft to line it up. You always just want to push gently on this by itself. Okay? The next thing we want to do before we forget is to reinsert the charge bar. We can take the bushings out of the bag. Now our most recent reloaders, for the 410 gauge only, we have come up with an O-ring system on the powder bushing. And this is because we had such a problem with migration of powders in the charge bar system. Now not all of our loaders have done this, it's just been recent. This is an old 410 bushing, powder bushing, which fits into the powder slot in the charge bar. This is the new system with double O-rings. You can install it from the top or from the bottom, but you want to make sure that you press this bushing in. It's going to be a tight fit because of the O-rings.
Spolar Power Load's most recent change in design calls for a system utilizing just one O-ring on the bushing.
Now the most important thing that you want to do is make sure that that bushing is below the surface of the top of the charge bar. Because it does not free float, if that bushing is sticking up above the charge bar and it contacts the washer seal in the charge or in the bottle holder, you're going to have a real problem with your washer seal. So you want to install your bulk bushings. It's very important that you install the correct bushings with each gauge change. You don't want to use a 12 gauge bushing set with a 410 reload. You'll have massively overcharged bushings and shells. Okay, so again you want to install the charge bar from the back, making sure that the charge bar roller fits up into the pocket of the charge bar and pushes forward. At that point, if you choose to install your counter trip pin, it screws into the side, the left side of the charge bar. Install your pin in your roller, your pin from the left side, roller from the right. Now before you activate the handle, it's very important that you change your dies and your wad cup. That's all included in your gauge change. We'll start with the dies. This is how your 410 dies will come. The die is always inserted with the long part of the die down. First we'll remove the 12 gauge dies, and the easiest way to do this is to pull the handle down slightly until the die turret comes around and the die is matched up with the large cutout on the die retaining ring. And just pop your dies out. Install your 410 dies. Okay. Now the next thing you need to change is going to be your wad cup and your wad fingers. This simply unscrews. You can see there's a knurled portion on the wad cup, which gives you easier grip. Remove your 12 gauge wad fingers. You'll always want to keep your gauge change items together so you don't have any question as to what gauge goes with what. Okay, also in your accessory bag is your 410 wad cup. Your 410 wad fingers. Your wad fingers simply pop down into there, and there's a little groove that they fit down into. And I usually like to hold them steady so they don't cock as I'm putting in the wad cup, and it just screws in. Sometimes there can be a little difficulty screwing these in. If there is, just put a little light gun oil on the threads, and that will help that process. Now we've moved our table around so you can get a better view at the shell seating post and the shell seating head, which is the last thing we need to change before our gauge change is complete. The easiest thing to do is to pull the handle down. Always make sure that your face is away from the handle if you're going to leave your hand off of the handle, because this is a spring-loaded action here and you don't want to hurt yourself. So stay clear of the handle if you're going to be away from it. Okay, you want to pull down on the shell seating cup, which is spring-loaded. You want to take a wrench and loosen the set screw, which is in the side of the shell seating head. Pull that off. Okay, once the head is off, the cup comes off easily. And that's your 12 gauge. Again, I usually try to keep my parts together so they don't get mixed up. Okay, next you have your 410 shell seating cup. Goes on first with the opened end towards the top. And you have to hold that down. Then this is the shell seating head. And you can see that there's a groove in the shaft here. And this is where you want your set screw to land. So you want to make sure that that shell seating head is completely down on that shaft. And tighten the set screw. It's always a good idea to keep the set screw out in this area so you're not trying to reach behind the machine to try to loosen it. On these smaller set screws, always make sure your wrench is installed completely or you can strip the screw out very easily. And that's your shell seating head. Now you should be ready to load 410.